Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for logging on today. Looking forward to hearing your opinions. Quite happy to answer as many questions as you like. Stop me halfway through if you like. Yeah, or wait to the end. It's entirely up to you. But yeah, I'd be quite keen to have a bit of discussion with yourselves as well if possible. Yeah, don't make it as if I'm dictating to you. Um, these are only really my opinions, how I see the world, I suppose, if you like. And yeah, quite happy to be challenged on that. Yeah, let's fire on. So, just a little bit about myself. Um, one or two of you might know me already, but I'm a monitor farmer, Monitor Farm Scotland. We've been in the project since 2022 and will be for another couple of years yet. We're beef and sheep, predominantly beef. Run around 250 spring calving cows and heifers. And we've got a small flock, and we've got of a small flock of Clyn ewes and ewe lambs. And yeah, there's about 100 to the top this year. We breed pedigree Aberdeen Angus and stabilize our cows alongside a commercial herd. We sell forage reared breeding heifers and bulls, pedigree and commercial. We sell store cattle. Uh, we finish steers, heifers, and bulls, as well as store lambs. Um, the system is very much a low input system. All cows are outwintered on deferred grass, kale, and bales. We calve outside in the spring. Um, the whole system, yeah, it's based around forage. You know, I started my farm business in 2016. Didn't have a great deal of working capital behind me, and still don't. Um, but you know, I've always had the ethos that I need to make best use of the resources I've got, and forage is one of my key resources. Don't have a huge amount of housing. Don't grow any forage, arable crops. Don't have a great deal of machinery. So yeah, forage is a main asset for us. So that's always been the focus. I've also been doing a little bit of work with Pharmax lately. I use Pharmax on my own farm, and I've done a bit of training recently, and yeah, hopefully going to continue with that and get elite accreditation at some point in the next few months. So potentially able to help other farmers use Pharmax. We'll cover that a little bit more next week. But for now, we're just going to stick with monitoring performance and all the things surrounding that. So just to kick off, I think it's really important to actually go through a bit of a thought process here because my breeding ethos is focused on, you know, it's a process. It's not something you just do off the cuff. And when it comes to, you know, monitoring performance, you have to think about what you're monitoring and why. There's no point collecting data just for the sake of it. Um, and just you know, as you can see in the slide here, just a bit of context. You know, everyone reads the news. You know, whether it's the Farmers Weekly or the Scottish Farmer or social media. You know, suckler herd is reducing, and it has been for quite a while, and it's expected to reduce even further yet. But you know, that's happened despite the beef price being as high as it's ever been, and it's probably going to increase even further. And it has been, you know, for the last 10 or 15 years at least. The beef in the UK is around about probably the most expensive beef in the world if you compare um, like for like in all the major beef producing countries. The UK is right up there, and yet we've got people leaving the industry. There's tight margins. There's there's lack of succession. There's all these things happening, and the beef price has been good. So you really need to start looking at what is actually under the surface. If that's the surface, it doesn't look very good. But there are issues underlying that we need to address. Um, so delve into some of the statistics that are out there. According to the most recent QMS Cattle and Sheep Enterprise Profitability document, this is in Scotland, only 44% of less favoured area suckler herds actually recorded a positive net margin, and that's with a headage payment, the Scottish Beef Calf Scheme, over £100 a calf. That's in there as well. Only 61% of cows calve within 9 weeks in reader finisher herds, and only 73% calve within 12 weeks. I think that's shocking. That that's terrible. Um, it doesn't paint a very good picture in terms of fertility um, in the Scottish beef herd. Um, in terms of output, the top one third reared 48 kilos more live weight per cow than the average, and that was mainly just due to higher in calf rates. It's not because their calves grow faster or they're fed more. It's because they've got higher in calf rates and less of them are dying. Their output's higher purely because of that. But just as a general outlook on the whole thing, more profitable operations in general had a tighter calving period. Um, their fertility was better. They had more cows and calf, and they had a higher output. All these things um, mold into one and really affect their bottom line. Um, and probably delving further down into the detail, looking at some of the variable costs and things. Generally higher performing herds fed less concentrates. The devil is in the detail, and not always these things match up. But as a general rule, they tended to feed less concentrates, and therefore they more than likely made better use of forage. You also look at the replacement rate as well. These are and the depreciation cost. These are sort of under the radar costs that quite often people forget. You've got, everyone knows about the cost of labor and the cost of feed and the cost of fertilizer, but the hidden cost is often what it costs to replace cows that are empty or drop out the herd for various reasons. Just the final point there, according to the AHDB and their farm bench statistics, the bottom 25% of herds in terms of profitability spent nearly 4 times as much on labour per cow than the top 25%. Now, I don't know if that's in terms of economies of scale or if it's purely because of the labour intense types of systems, but it really does make you think that maybe there are certain things that people can improve on to be a bit more efficient with their time. And if you really cost out your time, accurately, and you start to add up the value, the lost value, if you like, of spending time doing unnecessary jobs, um, it does seem to add up quite a bit. So I would, if you look at the main factors that affect suckler herd profitability, some of the things that you would draw out from those figures there: fertility, optimizing output, variable costs, cow depreciation costs, labour, and fixed costs. Fixed costs are there whether you like it or not. It's a huge factor in suckler herd profitability, and it really can drag you down. So all these things are there. They're all up for discussion, but I don't think we discuss them enough. And the context here, we're here to talk monitoring performance. All of these things can be improved when you monitor them and make a plan of how to improve them. These things aren't a given. They're not forced upon us by the government. They're not forced upon us by circumstance. We can improve them, and that's sort of what I'm here today to talk about. Um, yeah, so yeah, delving into those points a little bit further. Fertility, it's probably one of the main factors, individual factors that affect um your profitability of a suckling herd. If you don't get calves, you're not going to have anything to sell, and you're really up the creek without a paddle. So, first off, in calf rate, that's vitally important. That's clearly important. But probably, calving spread, calving interval, replacement rate, these are all things linked to fertility, um, but probably have influences later on. Calving spread, if your cows are spread calving over months and months and months, yes, that shows poor fertility, but it's also going to impact your labor costs. You're going to have to be continually checking them, spending time when you could be doing something else. Your calves are probably going to be disadvantaged even. The later born ones are going to be lighter at weaning time, and they're going to be constantly behind the rest. In terms of output, you could go over the top and push for extreme growth rates and everything, but it's going to have negative effects on something else. Your the type of farm that you've got do high input cows suit that farm? What kind of resources do you have in farm? Variable costs. These are all things that obviously vary by the numbers of cattle that you've got, but they can always be improved as well. Vet and med, the health of your herd. Do you have underlying health issues? Do you have is there a Jonas problem? Is there a BVD problem? IBR? Or do you have pneumonia in your sheds? Is there scour? Are there reasons that you're losing calves at calving time? The costs associated with dealing with these problems all mount up too. Cow depreciation, I covered that earlier. All of these things are costs that come off the bottom line, but quite often get forgotten about. I think a key thing for me is labor. As we covered in the previous slide, it is possible to really fall by the wayside in terms of labor if you're not paying attention. I think there's this so the old chestnut that farming's a way of life, and it's not a business, it's a way of life. I treat my farm like a business because it needs to support me like a business does. Um, and if I'm having to suckle a calf at 9 o'clock at night when I could be at home with my wife and family, then I know where my bread's buttered. Um, you know, these things can be improved when you think about them, and you think about them as things that need to be improved and not something that's just a given. Fixed costs, they're there. It's probably not as relevant in this discussion, but it's always something that you need to think about in terms of suckler cows because they're one of the major factors as well that affect profitability. So I'm just gonna just briefly before we go into it, I'm just gonna go through the season in chronological order of the sort of things that we collect, and later on we're going to cover what the sort of influences they have. Um, as I said, we calve outside in spring, so it's really important for us to have cows that calve themselves. From a labour point of view, it's really important that we have calves that hit the ground running, they get up and they suck. They get the first dose of colostrum straight away, and that's going to have, they're going to be more healthier all the way through their lives, basically, when they've got that immunity straight away. So how does that link to birth weights? Well, there's a direct correlation between birth weight and how easy they're going to be to calve. Obviously, that's linked to the cow and the bull, but it's important to think about birth weight, or you don't have to to weigh them. You can estimate them, but the physical size of the calf coming out of the cow, if it's massive, you're gonna. It goes without saying that you're gonna have potential issues. So I think it's worth recording. It's worth thinking about. You don't have to weigh. You can estimate them if you like, but for us, we weigh them. The calf crate that you can see there in the picture, that's something we use to get accurate weights. It's good for health and safety as well. But it's something we can use to analyze. We can compare sires, like for like, to compare the average birth weights. We've had sires in the past. If you're not paying attention, you would think everything's fine, but it can be 5 or 10 kilos heavier than other sires, and it does start to make you think that you could maybe be, making changes to your bull team to improve things. In terms of calving, again, labor cost huge. These things mount up. I was chatting to a friend this morning who was speaking to a neighbour, and he had a bill for a cesarean section that was over £600. That's profit for that cow, probably gone for the next few years at least. These things do mount up. Mortality again. If you're losing calves left, right, and centre because you're having calving issues, that's not really gonna add up. Vigor as well, that's linked to colostrum intake. They're more likely to get up off the ground and circle quickly. So these things are the sorts of things that we'll take records of at the time. We'll score them. Birth weights are the weights, obviously. Calving ease is scored from 1 through to 5. Same with calf vigor, and also mothering ability. These things, although you think that they're potential, calf loss costs, so much of it is about labor. How often do you hear, certainly these people who quite often are reducing their herds or they're dispersing, they talk about labor. They can't get labor. Well, my theory is we need to cut out the labor and change the system rather than cry about the lack of labor. So these scores, cow aggression as well, again, labor, health and safety, that's not good for anyone. Scored 1 to 5. Teat and other scores, we will take scores at calving time because that's the most crucial time a cow's udder is scored. There's no point scoring our udder when she's been suckling a calf for 6 months, because it's basically irrelevant. The key time for udders is just at calving time because it's going to be full of milk. Because like I say, if we calve outside and a cow's udder is dragging on the floor, the calf's probably not going to be able to suck it. It might get dirty. There might be infection. I'm probably going to have to bring the calf in and assist the calf to suckle. Again, labor cost. There's a chance of mastitis. All these things can go wrong, and it might not even be the udder. The udder could be perfectly fine, but the teats are wrong, and the teats are pointing in funny directions, or they're misshaped, or they're too big or too little. These things all have an influence. Now they're not a death knell if something isn't perfect. Nothing is ever perfect, but it's another point that you can add to the list of things as you go through, and make selection decisions later on. It can be something that can help you. Going into the breeding season, and obviously looking back at the calving season that just passed, I think it's really important to constantly assess things. We have 2 or 3 periods throughout the year where we assess what's going on. Usually after calving time, after the summer, and in the back end of the year, at the key points in time, and assess where we're at and what we can change in the future. So, in the summertime, we're usually looking back at calving time, looking at how many cows calved in the first cycle, which gives us an overall picture of the fertility in the herd, and then we can try and make things make improvements to rectify that in the coming season. Um, Calving interval, that's something that's quite topical in this country, or certainly in Scotland at least, because the changes to the Scottish beef calf scheme are coming in. There's a 410-day limit to the calving interval, and I think that's there's been a lot of chat around that recently. But I think if you're covering all these other aspects, I don't think it's as relevant as some people would like to believe. But these are all things that we're monitoring and assessing every year. Calving assist rate, once you finish calving, just look back and look at how the year's gone compared to previous years. We're, I would count as an assistance if I've had to touch the calf. It doesn't matter whether I've pulled it out by hand or I've used ropes or the calving jack or whatever. If I've had to help it in any way, it's assisted. Um, again, that's a labor cost. So we're making decisions off the back of that. If you're seeing far too many cows looking for assistance, then we're tracing things back. We're looking at the bulls who were fathers of those calves, looking at the nutrition, looking at the breeding of the cows themselves, looking back at the birth weights, looking back to try and diagnose why these things happened. I think again, just to reiterate the labour, the total calving period, for us, we calve in 2 cycles. It's over and done with pretty quickly. But some of the statistics are out there. I think looking back at the AHDB figures, I think there was a suggestion that the average calving period in the UK is 15 weeks. I mean, if that isn't a labour drain, I don't know what is. Through the summer, service records, I think they're vitally important. You don't need to spend, hours and hours watching every single cow being served because that's not really productive. But I think it is really important to spend time with your herd, with your different management groups, paying attention to which cows are in season that day. You don't need to sit and watch them being bulled, but you need to take note of who's in season and pay attention to see whether she comes back in season the next cycle. An example that we had last year, we had a young bull out with heifers, and the plan was only to give him 2 cycles, as we do with everything else. In the second cycle, I noticed that there were far too many repeats. It was becoming a bit of a concern, and I stuck an older bull in for 10 days afterwards. And when it came to scanning time, that old bull had served half the group in 10 days, and the young bull had done half the group in 6 weeks. So, attention to detail does reap dividends. Bull to cow ratio, again, that's up for discussion. Everyone's situation is different. You might have a smaller herd and you've only got one bull, or maybe you've got pedigree cows or whatever. There's a huge amount of different reasons why your ratio might be different. Depends what your priorities are. Do you want to try and be economical and get your bull to do as many cows as possible? That's fair enough. Or is your priority to get absolutely every single cow and calf if possible? And there probably are things that you can, there's a balance to be had. For us, it's probably because we calve in a short period, we probably do have a much lower bull to cow ratio as a result. I think it's also important to look at the age of your cows. Some people would like you to believe that you need to be replacing your older cows and replacing them with younger cows because they're genetically better or they're more productive and all the rest of it. So that's not something I subscribe to. Um, Personally, I believe if a cow is jumping through all the hoops that we need her to, and she's getting to 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14 years old, that shows that the system works. And it shows that she works within the system. So personally, I believe that's quite important. And I think if your cows are dropping out before they get to 10 years old, I think it probably shows that you've got a problem somewhere, whether it's health, whether it's just in the breeding or your management, something isn't working if you don't have many older cows. So I think that's something just to look at. You don't need to measure it, obviously, but just have a look through and see who's dropping out and how old they are, and maybe how old their mothers were when they dropped out, because it can just show you a little bit of information. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Just got a couple of
Um,
questions there, Duncan, if you don't mind.
yeah. Cool.
So the first one's from Daniel Stout asking what the scoring system is for your teat and others.
Yeah. So teach and others, we score them. They're scored on a scale from 1 to 9. So one is, there's neither end is good basically. You're looking for something in the middle. So from 1 to 9, if it's teat, for example, one's a one scored teat is absolutely massive, about the thickness of your wrist. 9 is tiny, probably the size of your little finger. Um, the one is probably balloon shaped and far too big for a calf. In terms of the udder, it's the same. The one scored udder is probably dragging on the floor. It's maybe got a broken floor. The suspension isn't very good. It's dangling and swishing about. And the 9 is a tiny udder, almost probably with no milk. Virtually nothing. So sort of what I'm looking for is um, probably a 6 or 7 in both scores. But obviously, gravity and age, it does play a part. So you do have to sort of give a little bit of leeway to older cows, because they will sag down eventually. But I think, yeah, if you're seeing a young heifer who's got a massive udder, it's probably not a good sign because it's only going to go south from there.
Yep. And just one more question from Martin. What is your bull to cow ratio?
So our bull to cow ratio is probably somewhere in the region of 1 bull to 25. It fluctuates a little bit here and there. Younger bulls will try and give them a little bit less to do. And older bulls obviously can do a bit more. We are looking at multi-sire mating. I've done a little bit of that this year, just past. So you can be a little bit more ambitious with your ratio when you're doing that. But yeah, it's all about yeah, find that balance between getting your cows and calf and making sure if you've got 12-week bulling period, I think you can probably be a little bit more ambitious. But when you've got a tight bulling period, you need to make sure that your bulls are on it. So
Perfect. Thanks, Duncan. And there's 2 more questions, but we'll keep moving on, and I'll hold those 2 questions for later on.
yeah, cool. Okay, right. So moving on to weaning time, it's another key time of the year. Um, so some of the things that we are looking at is information to gather. So clearly weaning weight does have an importance. Um, if possible, if you can try and adjust the weights to 200 days of age, and that's a far more accurate way to draw a comparison. The farm management package that we use, Farm Matters, it does that automatically. But if you're using Excel spreadsheets or something, you need to try and deduct the birth weight and adjust for age, which will then give you a fair comparison. Now that's only part of the picture. What a cow does to rear the calf it's only part of the thing if you've got extremely good nutrition, or I know we're pasture for life here, but if there's people out there that are creep feeding, that plays its part as well, and the genetics of the calf. These things can all vary that result, but it can be a useful way to kind of draw comparisons. Um, we'll weigh the cows at weaning time as well, because it's a useful tool as well to sort of track where the herd is going, and it gives us a chance to try and work out the cow to calf weaning ratio, because it can give you some indication of cows that are more productive than others. Now, the a lot of the lines are out there that large cows are inefficient. You can get a 900 kilo cow that gives you a 300 kilo calf, or a 600 kilo cow gives you a 300 kilo calf. And clearly the ratio it supports the smaller cow. And I think that's true. But there are nuances out there that I think can be misleading. Um, Extremes are never normally a good thing, in my opinion, in cattle, and you can go too far the other way. You've got, you can get very small cows that give you a good calf. You get a weaning ratio of 60%. So, she could be making a tremendous job of her calf, but she doesn't get in calf herself. She's, virtually, giving her all to that calf, and she can't get back in calf, and that's no use to anyone. So there needs to be a balance found between cows that are productive and, if there's a certain amount of maternal efficiency, if you like, that she can rear a good calf, um, but not to the detriment of her own fertility. So we'll also take body condition scores at weaning time, and again that all builds into the picture. Not using any of these things in isolation. We're not culling cows or selecting heifers to breed or anything like that. All of one thing. These things all go in to build a picture. And yeah, I think that's important. Cow frame score. That's not essential. It's not something you have to do. It's something we are doing. Again, just to probably provide a bit of information for people who buy stock from us. So frame score is basically the physical height of an animal relative to her age. There's you could have a 650 kilo cow who's about 6'5", and she's skin and bone, or she could be about 3'6" and she's a butterball, and they're two completely different animals, but they weigh the same. So having a picture of mature weight, body condition score, and frame score can help build a picture of what type of animal this beast is. We'll record the docility of calves at weaning time. We like to do that at weaning time, as it's the first time that we properly handle the calves. So as we calve outside, they're tagged and weighed and all the rest of it, and then all being well, they're basically not touched again until weaning time, apart from pasture moves, regular pasture moves through the day, through the week. So getting a handle of calf docility does give you an idea of whether you're making breeding decisions later on in the winter time or into the spring. What was that calf like, in its rawest form, if you like? And if it was going loopy and jumping around and causing a fuss, I would seriously consider whether you really want to breed with that animal later on. And all of these things again factor into labour. You know, if you're jumping around the crush and jumping over gates and hurting yourself or hurting people, that's not good for anyone. So I think it's something again that you can just factor in. We score it 1 till 5 with half scores. You can score it any way you like, but that's just sort of how we do it, and it's simple to understand. Moving on to the next part. Um, so in a chronological order, moving on to growing and finishing animals. We do self-store cattle, but we also finish as well to a certain extent. And I think it's quite useful to obviously monitor the growth rates of these cattle clearly because they're almost your cash crop if you like. So it is important that they they there's a certain level of output there. Um, and generally speaking, the value of the diets that these cattle are on, whether it's grass, forage crops, or in some cases, obviously concentrates, not for everyone, but they're generally more valuable diets. You've got age dates sometimes to meet. You can't really afford for these cattle to be hanging around. If it gets quite costly if they're hanging around too long. So I think it's quite important to get turnout weights. That is if they're inside or outside. In the springtime, at the start of the growing season, and I think if possible, look to batch them up um, by weights or per size to reduce competition, if possible. I think obviously going through the summertime when you're growing, they're hopefully thriving, and it's obviously important to monitor that where you can. But there is data out there that suggests that excessive weighing is kind of detrimental. I've read some figures out there that say around about a day's growth is lost every time you weigh. So if you think about that, it's if you're weighing every single week, you're probably two steps forward or one step back. Um, but again, it is important to monitor these things and work out what's going wrong, if there's anything going wrong, or what's going right. Even things, these cattle could be growing even faster than you thought they might be. So maybe you need to start speaking to abattoirs and get things booked in advance. It's not all bad. Um, for example, I mean, we had a situation last summer where or this summer just passed, we were finishing bulls outside at grass. We had a light group and a heavy group. Um, and the light group were doing 1.75 kilos per day since turnout, and the heavy group were doing over 2. We took fecal samples, and the light group needed treatment, and the heavy group didn't. And post treatment, the light group jumped from 1.75 to 2.2. Meanwhile, the heavy group were also doing around 2.2. So just a simple fecal sample um, to assess to see whether there was some kind of parasite issue in there. It made quite a huge difference actually to the overall output of the group, and it didn't cost a great deal. But I think not weighing, I probably wouldn't have noticed it. And then once you had the weights there, I was going through the list of different things that could be issues, um, and the parasites ended up being the one. So these things are important. It's also worth looking at the quality of the sward as well if you're grazing at grass, obviously. I think it's worthwhile getting forage analysis done. I think I've noticed quite a lot recently the different values of different types of land and different stock thriving in different areas. We've got a block of land that's in Deeside, and it's well known for having poor minerals, or it's been deprived of many minerals. We've also got ground near Inverurie, which is mineral rich, and it seems to be a great place for growing cattle. But it's important to understand that not all grass is the same, um, and it can help you build the picture going forward. A few things just that I think are important to speak about. I'm a lot of this presentation has been coming at the angle of the breeding end. It's kind of where my passion lies. But at the end of the day, whether you're a breeder finisher a breeder who's selling store, or if you're a store buyer and obviously a finisher, all these things are relevant, but the different ends of the spectrum do need to interlink. And what's good for the breeder isn't always ideal for the finisher. Everyone wants calves that spit out and land on the ground with no assistance and all the rest of it. Cows that are very fat and fleshy, but you know, from a finisher's point of view, do they always grow? Do they always do what you want them to do? Maybe not always. So there needs to be a link up between the two ends. And obviously, if you are a breeder finisher, you've got the chance to do that yourself. Um, but I think kind of what I mentioned earlier about the mature size of the cows, that's obviously going to have a part to play with the type of finishing animal that is going to result from that. And clearly, a very small cow is going to give you realistically a smallish finished animal as well. And that sort of link up between the mature size and the frame score versus the body condition score will also kind of give you some clues of what that animal is going to be like at a later date. Um, you know, clearly cows that are higher frame scored and a lot more frame about them, the finishing stock off of them are probably going to need a little bit more feed to finish. They might have a higher carcass weight in the end, but they're going to take longer and more feed to get there. So that's something to take into consideration. And if you want to improve that, if you feel like your finishing stock are taking too long to finish or they're too big, then you can make adaptations to your suckler herd to improve that, reduce your frame score, or try and select cows that are higher body condition to mitigate that. And again, depending on the finishing regime, um, if depending on if you're the finisher yourself or if you're selling them on, you know, the type of system that they're going to probably does have, it's a consideration as well. The type of cattle, if for instance, we're here today, as members of the Pasture for Life, so we're forage, we're all run forage type systems, so cattle that thrive from forage are what we're looking for. So generally, higher body condition score, cattle with that inherent condition score on their back are going to be more likely to be suitable. Again, adding terminal sires, that's something you could look at as well, whether you want to, have a low cost cow, but add a little bit of growth or meat to them to try and try and add something at the opposite end of the spectrum. But again, that has considerations for your labor and your input costs and all the rest of it. And again, you probably need to think about your marketing of your progeny. Where do they go? And yeah, what time of year? What's your feeding? All these things all feed into your breeding decisions later on. So I think probably as a key thing here, this is kind of my main message here. Select for what you want to happen, and it'll happen. You see a lot of people complaining about things, complaining about the labor involved or the feed price, this, that, and the next thing. But if you want your herd or your business to be taking care of itself, in tune with the farm and the environment that they're in, then select for that to happen, and it will happen. Need to breed from cattle that fit your system, and don't breed from those that don't. It's not rocket science, but I think it's important that you sit down and look at your farm and the land that you run um, as a resource that you've got, and you need to match the type of cattle that you run to that resource, and then everything feeds on from there. So again, collecting records on traits that are important to that. For us, we've got an upland type farm, so I need small to medium sized cows that carry a lot of flesh. If you're in a lower ground farm that maybe things are a little bit different, you can probably stand a larger cow. You might use a continental type breed. All these things are different factors. But extremes are never normally a good idea in my opinion. Um, there's not that many places in the world that extremes actually suit. So that's worth paying attention to. Selecting cattle that have massive weaning weights, it's probably gonna um, draw you down a wrong path at some point. Um, it's also worth thinking about and looking into the traits that we're measuring. So I think it's important to measure all these traits, but you need to understand that not everyone has a direct correlation to the next generation. They're not always completely heritable. For example, calving ease is actually very unheritable. It's one of the lowest heritability traits there is, purely because there are so many factors that affect it, whether it's the environment, whether it's the feeding, whether it's there's a lot of different things that affect it, the weather even. Whereas growth is very highly heritable. So these sorts of things all work differently. I think your breeding decisions sort of need to work, as I said before, hand in hand with each end of the spectrum, whether it's a breeding end or the production. I think as I said, you need to, if you're a breeder, you need to think about what the finisher needs, and if you're a finisher, you need to think, does your store supplier actually know what I need? And that's how things work more in tandem. But I think the key point is you need to select for what you want to happen. Just a few final points. As I said before, I think it's important to look at, maybe haven't covered how you record data. So we use a program called Farm Matters. There are many others out there. Some of you might use Farm Matters, some of you might use other ones. That's fine, but I think it's worth investing a little bit of money in them if you don't have any at the moment, um, or certainly look into what the capabilities of your system are. I think they're not all the same, but we like Farm Matters because it's very straightforward and no fuss, and it does a lot of the things that we want it to do. So this is a screen just with some cows on it that you can rank the cows by their calving interval. Um, you can store all their body condition scores historically. You can rank them by their udder scores or teat scores, or their own dams udder scores or teat scores. You can, if you're wanting to draw up a short list of heifers that you want to keep for the bull, you can rank them by things that you find important. And just maybe another point, I'm not perfect. We've been on a bit of a journey over the last few years to try and improve our herd. We started off with a bit of a Heinz 57 herd, and we've culled and culled and culled, and we've bought some in, and we're now at a point I think we're pretty happy. This is a excerpt from, I've got a spreadsheet that I use to monitor important things from year to year. And we've made strides in a lot of things, but it's taken time to get there. But my point is that you can make improvements on these key performance indicators over time if you gather information, make decisions off the back of them, monitor and reassess again each year. The performance here at the start is probably more like some of the performance that would be comparable to some of the bad statistics that we saw earlier on. but you can improve them. They will get better if you monitor them and try and get better. There's just a few conclusions here at the end. You know, we're here to talk about monitoring performance, but I think you need to take a step back first and think about the type of farm that you've got, the type of system that farm suits best, and then think about the cattle that system actually needs. And then only then can you really properly think about the type of information you need to gather and how you interpret that information. That's the thought process I think you need to go through before you just start gathering things for no reason. Yeah, and I think you need to, really think about which traits are important to you. Not everyone is important. Um, Not everyone is something you need to, you know, really drill down into. But it's all part of the information that you can use to to make decisions. Measure to manage is the cliche, but it's completely true in my opinion. I think it's useful again to benchmark amongst your peers, friends, neighbours, if you can. We're quite lucky ourselves to be part of the Monitor Farm program in Scotland here, and gives you opportunity to compare and contrast with others. But you've also got to be wary that every single farm is different, and you know, even your neighbour down the road could be slightly different from you. So everyone's got their own nuances. Again, farm management software, I think it's really important to look into that if you don't already have one, and try and find one that suits you best and what you need it to do. Because like I said, they're not all the same. And the main take home, I think, is select for what you want to happen, and it'll happen. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Duncan. We're just going to try and get through all these questions before we finish up at 1:15. Great presentation. Really appreciate it. I'll just fire these questions to you, and if we need a bit more detail, I'll ask the person who put them if they can maybe go into it. So, sort of, how much labour do you have available to you?
So our farm, there's just myself, and we've got one full-time member of staff. So and I'm not even fully full time all the time. But yeah, we've been up till now around about 150 cows and followers per labour unit usually.
Right. Great. And then just another question which came from Jock, which was related to that. What are you aiming for in terms of the amount of labour per cow?
I think it's difficult. I think it's quite depends on the farm itself, because we're quite split up. We've got 2 or 3 blocks of land that are a wee bit of distance apart, and the the labour required to run 3 blocks that are further miles apart is different to if they're all in one place. So yeah, probably where we are is probably not too bad. But if we can improve that, that would be great. But when you've got there is a balance to be had when you've got a load of stock and not much labor. It doesn't take if someone gets injured or someone leaves or even holidays, you're spreading yourself quite thin. So there is a balance to be had. But yeah, we'll just see how things pan out, basically.
Great, thanks. And I think this is a question from Victor. If you come to move the cows every day, do you find that affects the docility score?
Well, I think they'll all be treated the same. So I think if we're moving, all the cows and calves get sort of treated the same through summer, so they will get moved regularly. But even this, so generally they're, we don't have, you know, head cases. They're all reasonably docile. But within that, when you get to weaning time, there is now and again a minority that you think, oh, okay, maybe need to, um, yeah, you're not going to get breeding, basically. So I wouldn't say it affects it negatively, and in fact, it might even make the less docile ones more obvious, I think.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. The next question was, what ratio of stores to finished cattle do you do, and how do you find weaning onto winter, early spring forage?
So we probably finish about a third. We will sell store probably about a third of those sold store, and then there'll be a third kept for breeding ourselves. So it's roughly a third, a third, a third. Um, and the second part of the question was,
How do you find weaning onto winter, early spring forage?
so the weaning time. So we use the quiet wean nose paddles. Um, so what that does is it's a two-stage weaning process where they're obviously kept back from suckling the cow's udder. They don't get the milk, but they still get full access to forage and all the rest of it. They're still grazing. Um, and what I've found is that actually makes the transition into their winter regime much smoother and easier. Um, because I found straight after weaning time, obviously the cows will bawl a little bit and they'll act as if they've just been newly weaned, but the calves don't. And it's amazing to see once you've run them through the yards and done whatever you need to do with them. Usually we'll just stick them back out to the field again. We'll usually have built up some good covers somewhere, with some tasty clover grass, um, and stick them out on there. It's amazing to see their heads are straight down, and they're, yeah, they're the only thing on their mind is filling their room. Um, it's amazing to see.
Yep. And another question here from Rosemary. What is the average mature cow weight that you're looking for?
Um, yeah, so current state of play is around about, give or take, 650, 660. So that's where we're at currently. Um, what do we think is ideal? Probably fraction less, maybe 625 to 650. But again, I think it's a bit of a balance, isn't it? So you go too low, well, if you go lower, you maybe cheapen your winter even more. You get maybe hardier cows even. Um, you can stock higher maybe, but your mature weight of your calves are probably, as they go on to be finished animals, is a bit lower. Um, so yeah, it's a bit of a balance, but I think where we're at's pretty good. We're not really finding that many dropouts. We don't have too many cows that are lean at weaning time. They all seem to be pretty comfortable doing the job that they're doing. So I think that's usually quite a good sign that you know they are suited to the system. So yeah, right about there.
Okay, look. And I've got a couple of questions from Jock here, so I'll just ask them all together. Sort of, at what point do you frame score your animals?
Yeah. So the frame score, I'm still learning about that a little bit. So um, I'm no expert yet. But what we've been doing is we frame scored the whole herd last year at weaning time. So everything that had a calf got frame scored. We frame scored the heifers, the in-calf heifers at that point as well. So we did them all about this time last year. But I think from what I gathered, the theory is with the frame scoring is that it's frame score relative to their age. So if they're tall as a yearling heifer, they're probably going to be tall as a cow. But obviously the actual measurement in centimeters or inches isn't that relevant, but it's how they compare to their peers. So in theory, the heifers I did last year will go on to match as they grow into cows. So I think what I'll probably do now that I've got a baseline for the whole herd, I'm probably just going to do maybe the heifers as they come in as first or second calvers, maybe, and then just keep adding that in. Because in theory, I guess once they're 3 or 4 years old, they're just going to stay the same. So it just gives us an idea. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't need to be broadcast. It doesn't need to be, not everyone needs to do it. I'm not telling, sitting here telling you all need to get a measuring tape out. But I think it's probably something to think about, maybe, as a tool to identify cattle that suit your business. Not everyone, some people breed their own placement. Some people need to buy them in. If you're buying in breeding bulls or whatever, you know, it's not that easy to find people who breed exactly what you want. Um, and if you're looking for a specific type, then it's a tool to inform your decisions, I suppose.
Okay, thanks. And just as another question from Jock, how are you taking growing cattle through winter?
Um, it's we've probably been a bit of a journey with that as well, I suppose. So we've done a few various types of regimes, if you like. For the last 3 or 4 years, we've outwintered heifer calves that will go on as and bull as heifers. Yeah, bull as keep as breeding heifers. Um, they're outwintered on deferred grass or kale with bales, and they've been one of the most satisfying things I've done in farming, if you like. It's quite incredible what the power of compensatory growth is. I've noticed that we're not always on the same hymn sheet when it comes to compensatory growth, going by social media, but there probably are caveats in there regarding eating quality. But I think there's probably a bit more research needs to be done there. But I think purely from a um, resource management almost idea, the whole compensatory growth thing is, I think it's really quite exciting. Um, but yeah, there is research out there that says that it might be to the detriment of eating quality. Um, but yeah, so that's breeding heifers. We've got breeding bulls still on their mothers right now outside on forage crops. Um, I'm hoping that'll be a similar outcome with those. Um, but we've got cattle housed conventionally, on baled silage or on pit silage and things. We kind of do a variation of different things to suit. So yeah, trying to find the right thing for each job.
Yeah, great. I've got a question here from Rachel. I'm not too sure what it's related to. So do you want to come in on that one, Rachel? It was just, were those bulls just on grass or some concentrates too?
Yeah, it was the bulls, the lightweight and the heavyweight bull group that you talked about earlier. It was just in relation to them if they were just in forage or concentrates as well.
Yeah, so I might get kicked out of the Zoom call. So they were getting concentrates. Um, so um, so in previous years we'd done intensive bull beef, which I didn't enjoy at all. I didn't like it, um, and it stuck out as a thing that didn't match the rest of our business. We've always been a forage-based business, but we had this small enterprise that was just intensive. Um, we've been breeding bulls through bringing breeding bulls through forage only, and we could see that the performance that they were getting at grass was pretty impressive, and it made us reconsider how we were doing our bull beef. So we decided to kick them outside in the springtime and try and finish them at grass. we were giving them concentrates, Rachel, so they were getting fed a pretty small amount, to be honest, around about a kilo to 2 kilos a head at that point. So it was still, yeah, their diet was 99% forage at that point. But I think they must have picked up some parasites in the springtime at turnout. And they were in different paddocks, and yeah, maybe there was parasites in one place and not another. But the heavy ones weren't too bad, but the light ones were. But yeah, by taking that fecal samples and treating them quickly, they just caught up straight away. And yeah, it was quite a good little trial.
And just one question from Martin. He asked, do you calve at 2 years old?
Yeah, everything's calved too. Yeah, yeah.
Great. And then there's just got one final question here, which is from Teleri, which it's quite a detailed question. So Teleri, if you're around, do you want to come and ask this question, just to make sure I don't miss anything out?
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, I'm in the middle of eating as well.
That's fine.
So, and this is very context dependent, but you were saying about not keeping cattle for too long, obviously. And we've got a suckler herd and finishing, but we've got very, very low quality grassland. And finding it is actually impacting their fertility now. Just wondering if you found in your experience that when you've got those lower quality grazing, actually you should be prioritizing the cows, the sucklers, and actually either giving them more recovery time over winter or weaning early, or getting those, like you said, getting those calves gone as stores so that so that the cows get prioritized. But just wondering how you found that balance really.
Well, tune in next week. We
Okay.
will answer that question. So I think a good way to answer that question is about Pharmax. So we will cover that next week. So it's basically a tool that I use, which is matching your resources on farm with enterprises, and that'd be quite an interesting scenario to plug into it, basically. And it's probably quite a common thing that happens in a lot of places. The same goes for sheep as well. Certainly this time of year when people need land for tupping their ewes on, it needs to be decent quality grass. And if you've got suckler cows with calves in the autumn and you're eating through your grass, these things do raise their heads where you've got resources that need sort of balanced. And yeah, I think Pharmax is a great way of dealing with that. Probably your situation to answer it before next week. I think you're probably, yeah, I think if you feel that the fertility of your herd's being compromised, then I think you probably need to prioritize that because, you know, the store cattle or the cash crop, if you like, they can, you could trade them at any point, but your cows, if you're not getting cows and calf where you feel like you're holding them back, then yeah, that's probably going to lead to further issues down the line. Maybe another point to think about is maybe, I don't know anything about your business, but are the cows the right type of cows if they're struggling to deal with it? These things are all things to be considered. But yeah, I think we could certainly deal with that scenario next week.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
That's great. We've just got one final question from James Yoxall, and then we'll wrap up. If you just want to unmute yourself, James.
Sorry, Jamie, it's Nikki. I was looking
Oh, hi,
over
Nikki.
James's shoulder. And thanks, Duncan. Really interesting. I did have a question. Sorry if I've missed this. All other things being equal with regards to your heifers, so obviously you'll select out ones that you've recorded as being of concern and not wanting to breed from. Do all the remaining heifers then go to the bull, or are you pulling out light ones and not bulling those and then just selling them as store?
Bit of both, really. So yeah, generally speaking, we try and bull as many heifers as we can. There'll be maybe the bottom 10% that can't be bulled for just not good enough. they're literally just never going to make it, as in they're probably smaller twins or there's been some issues or whatever. We'll probably pull out the bottom 10%. We'll then start looking at some of the information that we've got, whether it's calving records or if it's information we have from the cow, as in docility wasn't particularly good, or she doesn't have a great udder or something like that. And we'll start just whittling away. And then probably at that point, we'll maybe look and see what numbers we've got, and see, do we have a few spare? And we'll just sell them on, or yeah, that's probably not a very good answer, but it is a little bit context dependent. But yeah, fundamentally, there'll be cattle that just won't be good enough, and they'll never get bulled, and then it's a case of trying to eliminating issues after that, and see where we are for that.
That's great. Thanks. No, good stuff. Really appreciate your time today, Duncan. That's really good, and I'm really looking forward to your to next week's presentation. You segued into that one quite well with stay tuned for next week. Just to highlight, folks, massive thanks to Duncan for his time, and then again next week. If you're not booked on to next week's call, if you follow this QR code here, that will take you straight to it, and you can book onto that. Will be same time, 12 till 1:15 on the 9th of December. And just to point out that this is this webinar series is made possible thanks to our funders from the Scottish Government Caitiff Fund and the Lachlan and Trossachs National Park Authority, who are part funding the whole series, as well as some events that we're doing over the next couple of months. And again, next week, meeting I've already gone over. There's also a host of other webinars on from other parts of the UK that Pasture Life are running. So feel free to browse through that and put yourself onto any that you fancy. So thanks very much for your time, folks, and hopefully we'll see some of you next week.
Thank you. Thanks very much.